Most disturbing true Christmas Eve horror stories. Story number 1, The Midnight Delivery. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been driving long-haul trucks for 23 years. I've seen every kind of weather, every type of road condition, and I've hauled everything from fresh produce to heavy machinery across 48 states. In all those years, I developed routines and instincts that kept me safe. I learned to read the highways like most people read books, understanding the rhythm of traffic, the personality of different routes, and the unspoken rules of the road. But nothing in my 2 decades of experience prepared me for what happened on Christmas Eve 2019 when I accepted a last-minute delivery that should have been routine. The dispatcher called me at 4:47 p.m. on December 24th. I was parked at a truck stop outside Billings, Montana, planning to shut down early for the holiday. My wife Sarah had made me promise to call her at midnight, our tradition when I couldn't make it home for Christmas. The job was simple. Pick up a refrigerated trailer in Bozeman and deliver it to a distribution center outside Seattle by December 26th. The pay was double the usual rate for holiday work, and the route was straightforward: Interstate 90 west through Montana into Idaho, then Washington. I calculated I could make the pickup, drive through the night, and still have Christmas Day to rest at a truck stop before the final push to Seattle. I pulled into the Bozeman facility at 6:15 p.m. The place was nearly deserted, just a single clerk in the office who barely looked up from his phone as he handed me the paperwork. The trailer was already hooked up and running, its refrigeration unit humming steadily at the required 34 degrees Fahrenheit. According to the manifest, I was hauling medical supplies, blood plasma vaccines, and temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals bound for hospitals in the Seattle area. The paperwork was in order, the seals were intact, and the trailer's refrigeration system showed no irregularities on the digital readout. I performed my standard pre-trip inspection, checking the trailer connections, the lights, the brake lines, and the tire pressure. Everything was perfect. By 7:30 p.m., I was rolling west on I-90, the lights of Bozeman fading in my mirrors. The weather forecast was clear and traffic was light. Most people were already home with their families. The highway stretched ahead through the darkness, illuminated only by my headlights and the occasional passing vehicle. I settled into the comfortable rhythm of long-distance driving, monitoring my speed, checking my mirrors, and listening to a country music station playing Christmas songs. The cab was warm, my coffee was hot, and the road was mine. Around 9:45 p.m., I crossed into Idaho. The terrain became more mountainous, the highway climbing and descending through passes surrounded by dense forests of pine and fir. Snow lined the shoulders and covered the hillsides, but the road itself was clear and dry. I passed through the small town of Wallace, its streets decorated with Christmas lights, then continued west into the wilderness. The radio station faded to static, so I switched to my CB radio, listening to the occasional chatter from other truckers somewhere out in the night. At 10:30 p.m., approximately 40 miles past Wallace, something changed. I can't describe it any other way. The quality of the night itself seemed to shift. The darkness beyond my headlights became deeper, more absolute, as if the forest had moved closer to the highway. The temperature gauge in my cab, which had been holding steady at 72 degrees, dropped to 68 in the span of a few seconds. I checked the trailer refrigeration unit, still running perfectly at 34 degrees. But the cab heater was on full blast and the temperature kept falling. Then I saw the hitchhiker. He was standing on the shoulder ahead, illuminated by my headlights, a man in a dark coat, thumb extended in the universal gesture. In 23 years of driving, I'd passed thousands of hitchhikers and never once stopped. It's against company policy, common sense, and every rule of road safety. But as I approached this man, my foot moved to the brake pedal without conscious decision. I told myself I was just slowing down to safely pass him, but the truck continued to decelerate until I came to a complete stop on the shoulder, 50 feet past where he stood. I sat there, engine idling, my hands gripping the steering wheel, asking myself what the hell I was doing. In my rearview mirror, I watched the man walk toward my truck. He moved normally, not rushed or threatening, just a steady, purposeful stride. When he reached the passenger door, he looked up at me through the window. His face was ordinary, middle-aged, weathered, unremarkable. He smiled and gestured toward the door handle. Against every instinct and years of conditioning, I reached over and unlocked the door. He climbed up into the cab, bringing with him a wave of cold air that made me shiver despite my heavy jacket. He settled into the passenger seat, pulled the door closed, and nodded to me in thanks. He didn't smell bad or good. He didn't smell like anything at all. His clothes were dark and nondescript, the kind of jacket and jeans you'd see on anyone. But when I looked directly at him, the details seemed to blur, becoming hard to fix in my memory. "Appreciate the ride," he said. His voice was normal, slightly hoarse, tired sounding. "Heading west?" "Seattle," I heard myself say. "You?" "Same direction," he replied. "I'll know my stop when we reach it." I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The cab temperature had dropped to 63 degrees and my breath was starting to fog. I cranked the heater to maximum, but the temperature continued to fall. The hitchhiker didn't seem to notice the cold. He sat perfectly, still, hands folded in his lap, staring out at the darkness beyond the windshield. We drove in silence for 20 minutes. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to study his features, but every time I looked directly at him, the details slipped away from my perception. I could see that he was there, occupying the passenger seat, but I couldn't seem to hold his appearance in my mind. It was like trying to remember a dream upon waking. The harder I focused, the more it faded. At 11:05 p.m., he spoke again. "You ever haul this route before, Marcus?" The sound of my name in his mouth made ice form in my stomach. I hadn't introduced myself. My name wasn't on any visible ID in the cab. "How do you know my name?" "It's on your thermos," he said, gesturing to the cup holder where my personalized travel mug sat. He was right. Sarah had given it to me 3 years ago with my name printed on the side, but the mug was turned so the name faced away from him. He couldn't have seen it from his angle. "Yeah," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I've driven I-90 hundreds of times. But not this version," he said. "What?" "This version of the highway. There are many versions, Marcus, many layers. Most people only ever see one. But on certain nights, under certain conditions, the layers overlap. The boundaries become thin, and travelers slip between them without ever realizing they've moved from one world to another." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a crazy person. But the cab temperature had now dropped to 58 degrees, and frost was forming on the inside of the windshield. Outside the windows, the landscape had changed in ways I couldn't quite identify. The trees seemed wrong, too tall, too dense, their branches reaching toward the highway like grasping fingers. The road itself looked the same, still I-90 with its familiar mile markers and signage, but the spaces between the signs had stretched, the distances grown longer. "I want you to get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Right now. I'm going to pull over and you're going to get out of my truck." "You can't pull over," he said calmly. "Not here. If you stop on this version of the highway, you'll never start moving again. You'll join the others." "What others?" "Look to your right. Look at the forest." I didn't want to look. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to keep my eyes on the road, to ignore him, to just drive. But my head turned anyway, my gaze drawn to the darkness beyond the passenger window. At first, I saw only trees and shadows. Then the headlights of an oncoming vehicle briefly illuminated the forest, and I saw them. People. Dozens of them. Standing among the trees perfectly still, all facing the highway. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothing from different eras. I saw a woman in a 1950s dress, a man in a business suit from the 1970s, a child in 1980s clothing, a trucker in a jacket identical to mine. They stood at varying distances from the road, some just a few feet into the tree line, others deeper in the forest. All of them stared at the highway with expressions of desperate longing. The oncoming vehicle passed, and the forest returned to darkness. But I could still feel them there, watching, waiting. They stopped, the hitchhiker said. On other Christmas Eves, other years. They pulled over on this stretch of highway when it was between worlds. And they've been here ever since, unable to leave, unable to move forward or backward, trapped in the space between. This isn't real, I said, my teeth chattering from cold that now had nothing to do with the temperature. This is a hallucination. I'm asleep at the truck stop. I never left Bozeman. You left Bozeman, he said. But you didn't arrive here by the road you think you took. Somewhere back there, miles ago, you made a turn without realizing it. A fork in the highway that only appears on Christmas Eve when the barriers between worlds thin. Most people never see it. But you were meant to see it, Marcus. You were meant to be here. Why? Because someone needs to carry a message back. Someone needs to remember and tell the story. That's always been my job. To ride with the ones who might make it through, to explain what they're seeing, to give them a chance to choose. Choose what? Whether to keep driving or to stop. Whether to trust the road or to give in to fear. Every year I ride this route on Christmas Eve. Every year I explain to those who find themselves here. And every year most of them stop. Fear makes them stop. Disbelief makes them stop. They pull over thinking they'll wait for dawn, wait for the world to make sense again. And they become part of the forest. The cab temperature was now 47 degrees and still falling. My fingers were numb on the steering wheel. The speedometer showed 65 miles per hour, my usual cruising speed, but the sensation of movement felt wrong, as if we were traveling much faster or much slower than the gauge indicated. The mile markers flashed past, but the numbers were wrong, jumping forward and backward in impossible sequences. Mile 42, mile 38, mile 51, mile 33. How do I get back? I asked. You keep driving. You don't stop no matter what you see, no matter what appears on the road. You maintain your speed, you keep your hands on the wheel, and you trust that the highway will return you to the world you know. But it won't be easy, Marcus. Between here and the other side, you'll see things designed to make you stop. Obstacles, people, situations that will make every instinct scream at you to hit the brakes. What things? Different for everyone. The road tests each traveler differently. It finds what frightens them, what they love, what they can't ignore. And it places those things in their path. At 11:35 p.m., I saw the first obstacle. A car was stopped in my lane ahead, hazard lights blashing, driver's door open. A figure stood beside it, waving frantically for help. Every fiber of my being wanted to slow down, to help, to stop. The driver appeared to be a woman, and as I got closer, I could see she was holding a child. Don't stop, the hitchhiker said quietly. It's not real. None of them are real. They're echoes, memories of people who stopped before. The road is showing them to you, testing you. I gripped the wheel tighter and maintained my speed. The woman and child grew larger in my windshield, their faces turning toward my approaching truck. The woman's mouth opened in a scream. The child reached out. I wanted to swerve, to brake, to do anything but drive straight toward them. But I held course, closed my eyes in the final second before impact, and felt nothing as my truck passed through them like smoke. When I opened my eyes, the road ahead was empty. In my rearview mirror, there was no car, no woman, no child. Good, the hitchhiker said, but it will get harder. He was right. Over the next 20 minutes, the obstacles increased in intensity and horror. I drove through a school bus full of children that appeared sideways across both lanes. I passed a massive pileup of vehicles, all burning, people trapped inside screaming for help. I navigated around a naked man covered in blood, running down the center of the highway. A police car appeared behind me, lights flashing, siren wailing, demanding I pull over. Each time the hitchhiker's voice provided the same calm instruction. Don't stop, keep driving. But the worst came at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before midnight. Ahead in my headlights, standing in the center of my lane, was Sarah, my wife. She wore the blue sweater I'd bought her for her last birthday, her hair pulled back the way she always wore it. Her face was bruised and bleeding, tears streaming down her cheeks. She held up both hands, begging me to stop. "Marcus, please." Her voice came through the windshield, impossible but clear. "I need help. There's been an accident. Please stop." My foot moved toward the brake pedal. This was my wife, the woman I'd been married to for 19 years, the mother of my 2 daughters. The person I loved more than anything in the world. Every instinct, every emotion, every human impulse screamed at me to stop the truck. "It's not her," the hitchhiker said, his voice harder now, more urgent. "Marcus, it's not Sarah. Your wife is home in Billings, safe with your daughters, waiting for your midnight call. This is a test, the final test. If you stop now, you'll never call her. You'll never go home. You'll join the others in the forest." "But what if it is her?" I sobbed, tears blurring my vision. "What if something happened? What if she needs me? Then stopping won't help her. You'll only trap yourself here. Trust me, Marcus. Trust the road. Drive." Sarah's face filled my windshield, her mouth open in a scream of betrayal and pain as my truck bore down on her. I closed my eyes, pressed my foot harder on the accelerator, and felt the truck shudder as if passing through something thick and resistant. When I opened my eyes, the road ahead was empty. At exactly midnight, everything changed. The temperature in the cab suddenly rose, the heater roaring back to its normal operation. The frost on the windshield melted in seconds. The darkness beyond my headlights lifted, replaced by normal night sky. I could see stars, see the regular shapes of trees and hills. The mile markers returned to proper sequence. And when I looked at the passenger seat, it was empty. The hitchhiker was gone. There was no sign he'd ever been there. No depression in the seat, no wet footprints from snow, nothing. My CB radio crackled to life with normal trucker chatter. The radio station came back playing Silent Night. According to my GPS, I was on I-90, 20 miles outside Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I'd somehow traveled over 80 miles in 90 minutes despite maintaining a steady 65 miles per hour. I pulled into the next truck stop and parked, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah. She answered on the second ring, her voice sleepy but happy. "Merry Christmas, baby," she said. "Right on time, our midnight tradition." "Sarah?" I said, my voice breaking. "You're okay? You're home? You're safe?" "Of course I'm safe." "Marcus, what's wrong? You sound terrified." I told her everything. The hitchhiker, the changed highway, the people in the forest, the obstacles, the vision of her on the road. She listened without interrupting, her breath steady on the line. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Marcus," she finally said, "my grandfather was a trucker. He died when I was 12, but I remember him telling a story about Christmas Eve about a strange stretch of highway in Idaho. He said he picked up a hitchhiker who told him about different versions of roads, about people who stopped and never moved again. He said he'd driven through impossible things, kept going when everything told him to stop. He said a man in the passenger seat guided him through. You never told me this." I didn't believe it. I thought it was just a story, maybe something he imagined or dreamed. But Marcus, he was adamant. He said it happened in 1967 on his last Christmas Eve run before he retired. He said he was chosen to make it through, to remember, to pass on the story. And now you're telling me the same thing happened to you? I looked at my trailer, its refrigeration unit humming normally, the medical supplies inside undisturbed and safe. I thought about the people in the forest, trapped between worlds, unable to move forward or back. I thought about the hitchhiker who appeared every Christmas Eve guiding travelers through the impossible highway. I'm delivering this load, I said. I'm finishing the job. But Sarah, I'm never driving on Christmas Eve again. Never. I understand, she said. Come home safe, Marcus. Come home to us. I completed the delivery to Seattle on December 26th, right on schedule. The medical supplies were perfect, the refrigeration had maintained proper temperature, and the paperwork was all in order. The receiving clerk never questioned the timing or asked about my route. To him, I was just another driver making another delivery. But I've never forgotten that night. I've driven I-90 through Idaho dozens of times since then, always during the day, never on Christmas Eve. I've looked for the spot where I picked up the hitchhiker, where the highway between worlds appears. In daylight, it's just normal road, trees, hills, mile markers in proper sequence. There's nothing to indicate that anything unusual ever happens there. Yet every Christmas Eve I think about it. I think about the people standing in the forest, trapped in that between space, watching the highway they can never rejoin. I think about the hitchhiker performing his annual duty, guiding those who find themselves on the wrong version of the road. And I think about the choice I made, to keep driving, to trust, to make it through. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving other routes, I wonder how many highways have these hidden versions. How many roads exist in layers, most invisible to normal travelers but accessible under the right or wrong conditions. How many people have vanished on lonely stretches of highway, not because they crashed or got lost, but because they slipped between worlds and couldn't find their way back? I'll never know the answers, but I know this. If you're ever driving alone on Christmas Eve and you see a hitchhiker standing by the side of a dark highway, don't stop. Keep driving. And if you do stop, if something compels you to pick them up, listen to what they tell you. Trust the road. Don't stop for anything, no matter what you see. Because once you stop on that highway between worlds, you become part of the forest, waiting forever for a chance to return home. I made it back. Sarah's grandfather made it back. We were the lucky ones, the chosen ones, selected to remember and tell the story. But in that forest in Idaho, on a version of I-90 that only appears on Christmas Eve, dozens of others are still waiting, still watching, still hoping for a chance to drive forward again. They serve as warnings, silent monuments to the danger of stopping, of giving in to fear, of letting disbelief overcome trust. I delivered that load of medical supplies, and somewhere in Seattle, those pharmaceuticals and blood plasma saved lives. People received vaccines, received treatment, received care, never knowing that their healing came from a truck that had traveled through impossible roads to reach them. The system worked. The delivery was made. Everything proceeded normally, except nothing was normal. And nothing has been truly normal since that night. Because now I know that the world we see isn't the only world that exists. The roads we travel aren't the only roads that are real. And on certain nights, under certain conditions, the boundaries between them become thin enough to cross. So I drive carefully now. I plan my routes to avoid being anywhere near Idaho on Christmas Eve. And when other truckers talk about strange experiences on the road, about things they can't explain, about stretches of highway that felt wrong or different, I listen carefully. Because I know they might have glimpsed what I saw, might have touched the edge of that other world without fully entering it. And I wonder about the hitchhiker. Who is he? How long has he been doing this? Was he once a driver himself, someone who made it through and now serves as a guide for others? Or is he something else, something native to that between space, performing an incomprehensible duty that keeps the world separate while allowing brief passages between them? I'll never know. But every Christmas Eve at midnight, I call Sarah, maintaining our tradition. And in that moment, I remember the impossible highway, the people in the forest, and the choice I made to keep driving. I remember that I made it home, that I survived, that I was given a second chance. And I'm grateful to be in the real world, on real roads, heading home to real people who love me. The midnight delivery was completed, but the memory of that journey will stay with me forever. A reminder that reality is thinner and stranger than we imagine, and that some roads should never be traveled, especially on Christmas Eve. Story number 2. The Last Passenger. My name is Rebecca Torres, and for 8 years I drove a Greyhound bus on routes throughout the Midwest. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. And I liked the routine of it. The familiar highways, the regular stops. The rhythm of passenger boarding and disembarking at stations from Chicago to St. Louis to Kansas City and back again. I learned to read people quickly, to spot trouble before it boarded, to maintain authority while remaining approachable. The job had its challenges, but I was good at it, and I took pride in running safe, on-time routes. On December 24, 2017, I was assigned the late route from Chicago to Kansas City, the Christmas Eve special, as veteran drivers called it. It departed Union Station at 10:45 p.m. and was scheduled to arrive in Kansas City at 5:30 a.m. on Christmas morning. The route was notorious among drivers for being depressing, full of people who had nowhere else to be on Christmas Eve, who couldn't afford plane tickets, or who were traveling to family obligations they dreaded. But it paid holiday bonus rates, and I needed the money. My daughter Emma was starting college in the fall, and every extra dollar helped. The bus was a newer model, only 2 years old, with comfortable seats, working bathrooms, and reliable heating. I'd driven this particular vehicle dozens of times and knew its quirks. The slight pull to the left that required constant correction, the way the rear door squeaked when opening, the faint rattling sound from the luggage compartment that sounded worse than it was. I performed my pre-trip inspection in the cold Chicago evening, checking tires, fluid levels, lights, and mirrors. Everything was in perfect working order. Passengers began boarding at 10:30 p.m. They were the usual mix. College students heading home for the holiday, older folks visiting family, a few young families with tired children, several solitary travelers who kept their eyes down and their earbuds in. I greeted each one, checked their tickets, and directed them to their seats. By 10:40 p.m., I had 37 passengers aboard, a good number for this route, enough to justify running it, but not so many that the bus felt crowded. At 10:43 p.m., 2 minutes before scheduled departure, the final passenger boarded. He was an elderly man, probably in his late 70s or early 80s, with white hair, weathered features, and clear blue eyes. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, old-fashioned but well-maintained, and carried a small leather suitcase that looked vintage, the kind with brass corners and worn leather straps. He climbed the steps slowly, each movement careful and deliberate. "Evening," I said. "Ticket, please." He handed me a paper ticket, the old-style kind that Greyhound had phased out years ago in favor of electronic confirmations. But the ticket appeared valid. Correct route, correct date, correct departure time. The paper felt odd under my fingers, slightly too thick, the printing slightly too dark, but the barcode scanner accepted it without issue. "Kansas City?" I asked, confirming his destination. "Yes, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet but clear, with a faint accent I couldn't place. "All the way through. We'll get you there by morning. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas to you too," he replied, then made his way down the aisle. I watched in my overhead mirror as he chose a seat near the back, settling in by the window on the driver's side. He placed his small suitcase on his lap and folded his hands over it, staring out at the dark platform. I closed the door, checked my mirrors one final time, and pulled out of Union Station at exactly 10:45 p.m. The streets of Chicago were relatively quiet for this time of night, decorated with Christmas lights that reflected off the wet pavement. Snow was forecasted for later in the evening, but the roads were currently clear. I merged onto I-55 South and settled into the familiar rhythm of highway driving, the bus humming along at 68 miles per hour. The passengers behind me were mostly quiet. A few read under the overhead lights. Some dozed. A child somewhere in the middle rows whimpered softly before falling silent. The bus was warm, the heater working efficiently, and the highway stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt illuminated by my headlights and the occasional passing vehicle. Around 11:30 p.m., about 45 miles outside Chicago, I glanced in my overhead mirror to check on the passengers. Most were sleeping now, their heads tilted against windows or rested on travel pillows. But the elderly man in the back was still awake, still sitting in the exact same position. Suitcase on lap, hands folded, staring out the window. He hadn't moved at all in 45 minutes. At midnight, I made the scheduled stop in Pontiac, Illinois. 3 passengers disembarked. No one boarded. Not surprising for Christmas Eve. The elderly man remained in his seat, unmoving. I used the restroom break, got a fresh coffee, and returned to the bus. We departed Pontiac at 12:17 a.m. and continued south. The snow began falling around 12:45 a.m., light at first, just flurries dancing in my headlights. But within 15 minutes it intensified, becoming a steady snowfall that reduced visibility and began accumulating on the road. I reduced my speed to 55, then to 50 as the conditions worsened. Other vehicles were doing the same, everyone moving carefully through the increasing whiteout. At 1:20 a.m. I made the scheduled stop in Bloomington, Illinois. 5 more passengers disembarked. Again, no one boarded. The station attendant informed me that the weather was expected to worsen, a winter storm moving in faster than forecasted. He recommended I consider stopping for the night, waiting it out. But I checked the highway conditions online, saw that I-55 was still open and passable, and made the decision to continue. I'd driven through worse weather than this. We departed Bloomington at 1:38 a.m. with 32 passengers remaining. The elderly man was still in his seat, still in the exact same position. I was beginning to find his stillness unsettling. Even sleeping passengers shift position, adjust their posture, move their heads. This man remained absolutely motionless, as if frozen in time. The snow intensified. By 2 a.m. I could barely see 50 feet ahead. The highway had become treacherous, covered in several inches of accumulating snow, with more falling constantly. I reduced my speed to 40 miles per hour, gripping the wheel tightly, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. The wipers struggled to keep up with the snow, leaving streaks that further reduced visibility. Other vehicles had disappeared from the highway. I realized I hadn't seen another car in over 15 minutes. The road felt abandoned, as if everyone else had found shelter and I was the only fool still driving. But stopping on the shoulder in these conditions would be dangerous. Another vehicle could rear-end me in the reduced visibility. The safest option was to continue to the next exit, find a safe place to park, and wait out the worst of the storm. At 2:23 a.m. everything changed. One moment I was driving through, heavy snow on a familiar stretch of I-55. The next moment the snow stopped, not gradually, not easing up. It simply ceased, as if I'd driven through a wall. The accumulation on the road disappeared. The sky cleared, revealing stars. The temperature gauge on my dashboard, which had been reading 27 degrees, suddenly showed 52. I checked my mirrors, certain I must have imagined it. But behind me, I could see the wall of snow, a vertical curtain of white stretching across the highway from horizon to horizon. It looked impossible, like a special effect from a movie, snow falling on one side of an invisible barrier while clear sky existed on the other. "What the hell?" I whispered, slowing the bus to 30 miles per hour. None of my passengers stirred. They slept through the impossible transition, unaware that anything unusual had occurred. The highway ahead looked normal, same white lines, same green mile markers, same distant lights of approaching towns. But something felt wrong. The quality of the darkness was different, heavier somehow. The stars overhead seemed brighter but in unfamiliar patterns, and the road, while appearing identical to I-55, felt subtly off in ways I couldn't articulate. I glanced at my GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. The screen showed static, the signal lost. My phone showed no service. The radio, which had been playing Christmas music from a Bloomington station, now produced only white noise across all frequencies. According to my odometer, I should be approaching the town of Lincoln, Illinois. But the signs I passed showed different names, towns I'd never heard of. Grantville, Mooreshead, New Bethany. At 2:45 a.m., I reached what should have been a scheduled stop. The sign indicated it was called Ashworth, though no such town existed on my route. The station looked like a Greyhound terminal. Same architecture, same color scheme, same layout. But something about it seemed off, outdated. The building style was right, but the details were wrong. Older signage, vintage fuel pumps, cars in the parking lot from decades past. I pulled into the station more from instinct and schedule than any conscious decision. The building was lit, apparently open. I applied the brakes, brought the bus to a stop in front of the main entrance, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying an odd smell. Not unpleasant, but unfamiliar, like a combination of diesel fuel, coffee, and something else I couldn't identify. "Ashworth," I announced, following protocol, even though this wasn't a scheduled stop. 15-minute break. Behind me, passengers stirred. Several stood, stretching and gathering belongings. A young mother with 2 children made her way to the front. A college-age kid in a university hoodie followed. A middle-aged businessman. A teenage girl. 6 passengers in total filed off the bus, descending the steps into the cold night. They moved normally, showing no sign that anything was unusual. They walked toward the station entrance as if this were any regular stop on any regular route. I started to rise from my seat, intending to follow them into the station to ask someone what the hell was happening. But before I could stand, the elderly man in the back spoke for the first time since boarding in Chicago. "Don't leave the bus, Rebecca." His voice carried clearly through the quiet interior, causing me to freeze halfway out of my seat. I looked in my overhead mirror and saw him still sitting in the same position, suitcase on lap, hands folded. But now he was looking directly at me, his blue eyes meeting mine in the reflection. "How do you know my name?" "Please sit down. Close the door. We need to talk." Every instinct told me to refuse, to demand answers, to maintain control of my vehicle and my passengers. But something in his tone, calm and authoritative, made me obey. I sat back down and pulled the door lever. The doors hissed closed. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Where are we?" "You're on the same highway," he said. "Interstate 55 running from Chicago to Kansas City, just as you have hundreds of times before, but you're traveling a version of it that exists parallel to the one you know. Think of it as a layer beneath the normal road or adjacent to it. On Christmas Eve, under the right meteorological and astronomical conditions, buses sometimes slip between the layers. It's been happening for decades. That's impossible. You drove through a wall of snow that stopped like it hit a physical barrier. Your GPS doesn't work. The radio produces only static. The towns you're passing don't exist on any map. Tell me, Rebecca, which part of that is possible? I had no answer. He was right. I'd witnessed the impossible, was living through it right now. The station outside looked normal but felt wrong, like a detailed movie set or a vivid dream. The passengers who got off, I said, what happens to them? They'll board other buses. Buses from other years, other times. The stations in this layer serve as transfer points, connecting routes that span decades. The woman with the children, she'll board a bus from 1998. The college student will find himself on a route from 2005. The businessman will step onto a vehicle from 1973. They won't realize it at first, but eventually they'll understand they're traveling through time as well as space. Why? I don't know why it happens, only that it does. I've been studying this phenomenon for longer than you've been alive. I'm what you might call a researcher, though my methods are unconventional. Every Christmas Eve, I board buses in Chicago, ride them through the shift, and observe what happens. I take notes, make recordings, try to understand the pattern and purpose of these journeys. You're saying this happens every Christmas Eve? Not every year, not every bus, but often enough that patterns emerge. Weather, conditions matter. Heavy snow seems to facilitate the transition. Timing matters, always late night or early morning. And the drivers matter, only certain people can navigate these routes successfully. Most can't. Most stop at the stations, become confused, make decisions that trap them in the wrong time period. But you, Rebecca, you have the potential to make it through. That's why I boarded your bus. Outside the window, I watched my 6 departed passengers enter the station. Through the large windows, I could see them inside, approaching a ticket counter where an attendant in a vintage uniform greeted them. Everything looked normal, but the scene felt staged, artificial. I need to get them back, I said. They're my passengers. I'm responsible for them. You can't get them back. They made their choice when they disembarked. The best thing you can do for them and for the others still on this bus is to keep driving. Don't stop at any more stations. Don't let anyone else off. Drive through the night until you reach Kansas City. If you can do that, you'll slip back through to the normal layer and the remaining passengers will arrive safely at their destination. And if I stop again, you'll become trapped here in this between time. Your bus will join the others permanently stationed at these terminals, vehicles from different eras, all stuck in this parallel highway. You'll drive routes forever, picking up passengers who are equally lost, never reaching your true destination, never returning home to your daughter. The mention of Emma hit me like a physical blow. You know about her? I know about all the drivers I ride with. I research them before boarding, learn their circumstances, understand what motivates them. It helps me determine who might succeed. You have a strong reason to make it through, Rebecca. Emma needs you. She's counting on you to be there for her graduation, for her college years, for her life. That makes you more likely to succeed than drivers with less pressing connections to the world. I looked at the station again, at my 6 lost passengers now being directed to different doors, different platforms, different buses that were somehow arriving despite the empty parking lot. I felt a desperate urge to stop this, to run inside and bring them back. But deeper than that urge was the certainty that the old man was right. They were beyond my help, and my only option was to save the others. Tell me exactly what to do, I said. Drive. Maintain your schedule as if this were a normal route. Don't stop at stations even if passengers request it. Don't pull over for any reason. Stay on the highway, follow the signs for Kansas City, and trust that the road will eventually return you to your proper time and place. Ignore anything unusual you see. Don't let fear make you stop. And whatever you do, don't let any passengers disembark until you reach Kansas City. What about you? I'll ride with you to the end, I always do. when I board a bus with a driver who might succeed. Consider me your guide, your confirmation that you're on the right path. As long as I remain in this seat, you're still on the route. If I disappear, it means you've made it through. I checked my remaining passengers. 26 people sleeping or reading, unaware of the impossible situation we were in. I was responsible for their safety, for getting them home. I thought about Emma waiting for me in our small apartment, probably still awake despite the late hour, excited about Christmas morning. "Okay," I said, "I'll drive." I released the parking brake, checked my mirrors, and pulled out of the Ashworth station. In my side mirror, I watched the building recede into the distance. 3 vintage buses were now parked where mine had been. A Greyhound from the 1970s, another from the 1980s, a third from the 1990s. Drivers stood beside them, looking confused and lost. I forced myself to look away, to focus on the road ahead. For the next hour, I drove through a landscape that resembled Illinois but felt increasingly wrong. The highway remained the same lanes, same surface, same mile markers. But the towns I passed were slightly off, their names familiar but not quite right, their buildings a strange mix of different architectural eras. I saw a gas station that combined 1960s design with 2000s era pumps, a restaurant that looked like a 1950s diner but advertised menu items that didn't exist until decades later. Everything was blurred, overlapping, as if multiple time periods were existing simultaneously. At 3:47 a.m., a passenger approached me, a young woman, maybe 25, who had been sleeping since Chicago. "Excuse me, driver. I need to get off at the next stop. It's urgent." "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "The next scheduled stop isn't until Springfield, still 2 hours away." "But I see stations. We've passed several. Why aren't you stopping?" "Those aren't on our route. I can only stop at scheduled locations." "This is bullshit," she said angrily. "I have rights as a passenger. Let me off this bus." "I can't do that. Please return to your seat." She argued for several minutes, her voice rising, disturbing other passengers. Several others joined in, demanding to know why I wasn't stopping, insisting they had the right to disembark. I maintained firm, repeated that I could only stop at scheduled locations, and eventually they retreated back to their seats, frustrated but compliant. The old man in the back watched the entire exchange without moving or speaking. When the passengers had settled, he nodded slightly, a gesture of approval. At 4:15 a.m., I saw the first of the impossible obstacles. A bus was stopped across both lanes ahead, completely blocking the highway. It was a vintage Greyhound from the 1960s, its red and white paint scheme faded and dirty. The emergency door was open, and passengers were standing on the highway, waving frantically for me to stop. "Don't stop," the old man called from the back. "Drive straight through." "I can't drive through a bus." "Yes, you can. It's not really there. It's a memory, an echo of a bus that stopped decades ago. The highway is testing you, seeing if you'll stop like that driver did. Trust me, Rebecca, drive." I gripped the wheel tighter, kept my foot on the accelerator, and aimed directly at the stopped bus. Every instinct screamed at me to brake, to swerve, to do anything but drive straight ahead. The passengers on the highway scattered as I approached, their faces showing terror and betrayal. The collision seemed inevitable, unavoidable. But at the last possible second, the bus and passengers flickered like a projection and vanished. My bus passed through empty space, the road ahead clear. In my rearview mirror, I saw the vintage bus reappear behind me, still stopped, still blocking the lanes for the next driver who might come along. Over the next 90 minutes, the highway threw increasingly desperate obstacles at me. I drove through what appeared to be massive accidents, vehicles piled up and burning. I passed families standing on the shoulder, holding children, begging for help. I navigated around animals that ran into my path, deer, dogs, even a horse, all of which vanished when I refused to swerve or brake. The highway was testing me repeatedly, and each time the old man's voice provided calm encouragement. Keep going. Don't stop. Trust the road. At 5:47 a.m., 17 minutes past my scheduled arrival time, I saw the skyline of Kansas City emerging from the pre-dawn darkness. But it wasn't quite right. The buildings were the same, but their heights and positions were slightly off, as if I were seeing the city from a different angle or different time period. "Almost through," the old man said. "The station is ahead. When you pull in, the transition will complete. Your passengers will disembark in the correct time and place, and you'll be home." The Kansas City terminal appeared ahead, looking normal and correct. I signaled, moved into the exit lane, and pulled off the highway. As I drove down the access road toward the station, the sky began to lighten. Dawn was breaking. Christmas morning was arriving. I pulled into the station at exactly 5:52 a.m. and brought the bus to a stop. The moment my wheels stopped moving, everything shifted. The station transformed from the slightly wrong version I'd been seeing to the completely familiar terminal I'd visited hundreds of times. My GPS flickered back to life. My phone showed service. The radio suddenly blared Christmas music from a Kansas City station. I opened the door and made the announcement, "Kansas City, final stop. Merry Christmas, everyone." 26 passengers filed off my bus, moving sleepily but happily into the terminal where family members waited to greet them. They showed no signs of having experienced anything unusual. To them, it had been a normal bus ride. They'd slept most of the way, arrived safely, and were now home for Christmas. When the last passenger had disembarked, I turned to check on the old man in the back. His seat was empty. The leather suitcase was gone. There was no sign he'd ever been there. But on the seat where he'd sat, I found a handwritten note on vintage paper. "Thank you for a successful journey. You did well. Your strength and determination got them home safely. Merry Christmas, Rebecca. Give Emma my regards. James Whitmore, route researcher, December 25, 1952. The date made my head spin. 1952. He'd been riding these routes for over 65 years, studying the phenomenon, guiding drivers through the impossible highways. Was he alive in my time? Dead? Trapped in the between time himself? I would never know. I completed my post-trip paperwork, filed my report, mentioning nothing unusual, describing it as a routine run with weather delays, and drove the empty bus to the maintenance yard. Then I caught a Greyhound back to Chicago, a normal one, traveling normal highways, arriving at normal times. Emma was waiting when I got home at 3 p.m. on Christmas Day. She hugged me tightly and said I looked exhausted. I told her it had been a long night, but nothing I couldn't handle. We opened presents, ate dinner, watched movies, and pretended everything was normal. But that night, after Emma had gone to bed, I searched online for information about James Whitmore and bus routes from 1952. I found a single newspaper article from the Kansas City Star, dated December 27, 1952. It described how a Greyhound bus driver named James Whitmore had disappeared along with his bus and 15 passengers somewhere between Bloomington, Illinois and Kansas City on Christmas Eve. The bus was never found. The passengers were never found. The incident was investigated but remained unsolved, eventually fading into obscurity. I printed the article and kept it in my wallet, a reminder that the impossible is real, that roads exist beyond the ones we can see, and that on Christmas Eve the boundaries between times and places become thin enough to cross. I drove for Greyhound for 2 more years after that night, but I never accepted another Christmas Eve route. I'd made it through once, delivered my passengers safely, returned home to my daughter. I wasn't going to risk it again. Other drivers took those runs and most of them completed their routes without incident. But sometimes I heard rumors. Drivers who reported strange weather transitions, unusual stations, passengers who disembarked and were never seen again. I never told my supervisors what really happened that night. They wouldn't have believed me, would have suggested I was overtired or hallucinating or suffering from some kind of breakdown. So I kept the secret, carried it alone, and remembered the old man's words. Only certain drivers can navigate these routes successfully. I'd been one of them. I'd driven through the impossible highway, maintained my schedule, refused to stop, and brought my passengers home. But I'd also lost 6 people to the between time, 6 souls now traveling routes through different years, possibly forever. That guilt stays with me even though I know there was nothing I could have done to save them. Emma graduated high school and started college. She's studying transportation engineering now, fascinated by highways and infrastructure. Sometimes she asked me about my years driving for Greyhound, about the strangest things I ever saw on the road. I tell her edited versions, bad weather, difficult passengers, mechanical problems. I don't tell her about Christmas Eve 2017. I don't tell her about the highway between times. But every Christmas Eve, I think about it. I think about James Whitmore, still riding routes through impossible highways, still guiding drivers, still researching a phenomenon he doesn't understand. I think about the passengers I lost, boarding buses from other decades, traveling to destinations in wrong years. And I think about the 26 people I saved who made it home to their families, who celebrated Christmas without ever knowing how close they'd come to being lost in time. The highway is still out there. The between time still exists. And on Christmas Eve, when weather and timing align perfectly, buses still slip through the boundaries, traveling routes that span decades. Some drivers make it through. Others stop at the wrong stations and become trapped forever, joining the lost vehicles that haunt those parallel roads. I made it through. I came home. But the memory of that journey stays with me, a reminder that reality is thinner and stranger than we imagine, and that sometimes the most important skill a driver can have isn't technical expertise or weather experience. It's the simple determination to keep moving forward no matter what impossibilities appear in your path. Story number 3, the Christmas broadcast. My name is David Brennan, and for 15 years I worked as a late-night radio DJ at WKRM, a small AM station in Des Moines, Iowa. It wasn't glamorous work, the graveyard shift never is, but I loved it. There's something special about being a voice in the darkness, keeping company with insomniacs, night shift workers, long-haul truckers, and anyone else who finds themselves awake when the rest of the world sleeps. I played a mix of classic rock, took call-in requests, shared stories, and occasionally discussed whatever topic crossed my mind. My show, Midnight with Brennan, ran from midnight to 6 a.m., 6 nights a week. The station itself was located in an old building on the east side of Des Moines, a 3-story structure that had been erected in 1947 and had housed the radio station since its founding in 1952. The broadcast booth was on the 2nd floor, a cramped room, with soundproofing panels, outdated equipment that we kept running through constant maintenance, and windows that looked out over the mostly empty parking lot. It was isolated, especially during my shift, when I was usually the only person in the entire building. The station manager had offered to have an intern or engineer stay with me, but I'd always declined. I liked the solitude, the feeling of being alone with my listeners in the deep hours of night. On Christmas Eve 2018, I was scheduled to work my regular shift. Most radio stations had special programming for the holiday, but WKRM kept to its usual format. Our listener base was small but loyal, and they expected consistency. So at 11:30 p.m. I arrived at the station, unlocked the building, climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, and settled into the broadcast booth to prepare for another night of keeping the darkness at bay with music and conversation. The evening DJ, Martha Collins, had left me the usual notes. technical issues to watch for, songs that had been requested, a reminder that we were low on coffee. She'd also left a gift on my console, a small wrapped package with a note that said, "Merry Christmas, David. Thanks for being the best late-night voice in the Midwest." I smiled, set it aside to open later, and began my pre-broadcast routine. At exactly midnight, I opened the microphone and began my show. Good morning, Des Moines, and welcome to a very special Christmas Day edition of Midnight with Brennan. I'm your host, David Brennan, and I'll be with you until 6 a.m., keeping you company through the longest, quietest hours of the holiday. Whether you're working tonight, traveling, or just can't sleep, I'm here for you. Let's start with a classic. Here's Peace on Earth by U2. I queued up the song, leaned back in my chair, and looked out at the snowy parking lot beyond my window. The forecast had called for light snow throughout the night, and fat flakes were falling steadily, accumulating on cars and pavement. The city beyond was mostly dark, most people asleep in their homes, resting before Christmas morning celebrations. The first hour proceeded normally. I played music, took a few call-in requests, shared some Christmas memories from my childhood. Around 1:15 a.m., a trucker called in from somewhere on I-90, thanking me for keeping him company on a lonely Christmas Eve drive. At 1:30 a.m., a night shift nurse from Mercy Medical Center requested a song for her co-workers. The show had its usual rhythm, familiar and comfortable. But at 1:47 a.m., something changed. I was queuing up the next song when I noticed interference on the console, a faint crackling sound underlying the audio feed. I checked the equipment looking for loose connections or technical problems, but everything appeared normal. The crackling persisted, growing slightly louder, like static on an old television or the sound of distant radio interference. Then, beneath the crackling, I heard something else. Voices. Faint, distorted, barely audible, but definitely human voices. They seemed to be speaking in overlapping conversations, multiple people talking at once, their words blurred together into an incomprehensible murmur. I adjusted the console's filters, trying to isolate or eliminate the interference, but the voices remained, neither increasing nor decreasing in volume. At 2:03 a.m., the voices clarified briefly, and I heard distinct words. Christmas Eve broadcast, 1952. Can anyone hear us? Station WKRM, please respond. My blood went cold. 1952 was the year the station was founded, 66 years ago. I grabbed my microphone and spoke off-air directly into the console. This is David Brennan at WKRM. If someone is transmitting, please identify yourself. The response came immediately, the voice suddenly clear and strong through my headphones. WKRM, this is Robert Jameson, overnight host. Date is December 25th, 1952. I'm receiving your transmission. Is this really 2018? I sat frozen, my hand trembling on the microphone switch. This was impossible. Radio signals don't travel through time. They broadcast, they transmit, they reach receivers within their range, but they don't cross decades. Yet I was hearing a voice claiming to be from 1952, and he was hearing me from 2018. This is David Brennan, I said carefully, my voice shaking. Yes, it's December 25th, 2018. How are you transmitting to me? I don't know, Robert Jameson replied, and something happened at 1:47 your time, 1:47 my time. The equipment started showing unusual readings. Then I started hearing voices, multiple voices, different people, all broadcasting from different years. I've counted at least 7 distinct broadcasts, all claiming to be at WKRM on Christmas Day, all from different decades. I looked at my console with new understanding. The overlapping voices I'd been hearing weren't interference or malfunction. They were other DJs, other overnight hosts, all broadcasting from the same booth across different time periods, somehow connected through an impossible phenomenon. Who else is transmitting? I asked. Let me list what I'm hearing, Robert said. There's me, 1952, someone named Thomas Carter from 1967, A woman, Linda Morrison from 1981. Another man, Peter Walsh from 1995. Someone named Sarah Chen from 2003. Another woman, Andrea Mitchell from 2011, and you, David Brennan from 2018. 7 broadcasts spanning 66 years, all somehow overlapping on this frequency. Can they all hear each other? I think so. Peter Walsh from 1995 just confirmed he can hear me. Linda Morrison from 1981 is responding too. David, I think something about Christmas Day, about this station, about this specific time between 1:47 and who knows when, creates a temporal convergence. The broadcasts from different years are bleeding together. I made a decision. I opened my live microphone and addressed my listeners. Oh, folks, something unusual is happening tonight. I'm experiencing technical interference that might cause some strange audio effects over the next few hours. Please bear with me. I'm going to continue the show, but you might hear some unexpected elements. Then I switched to the internal console frequency, where the other broadcasts were overlapping. This is David Brennan, 2018. If all the other WKRM overnight hosts can hear me, please identify yourselves one at a time. Over the next several minutes, they did. Robert Jameson, 1952, the station's original overnight host, broadcasting from a booth that looked very different from mine. All analog equipment, turntables, tape machines. Thomas Carter, 1967, who described the building as it had been during its first major renovation. Linda Morrison, 1981, the station's first female overnight host, working with early digital equipment. Peter Walsh, 1995, who remembered the station transitioning to computer-controlled playlists. Sarah Chen, 2003, who'd held my time slot before me and had mysteriously resigned after just 6 months. Andrea Mitchell, 2011, who'd left the station to move to a larger market in Chicago. We were 7 voices, 7 overnight DJs, all working the same Christmas Day shift across 66 years. Suddenly connected through an inexplicable temporal anomaly. Has anyone else experienced this before? I asked. Sarah Chen from 2003 spoke up, her voice clear and frightened. Yes. This is why I resigned. It happened once before on Christmas Eve 2002. I heard voices, thought I was losing my mind, and when I tried to tell the station manager, he thought I'd been drinking. I quit rather than explain what I'd experienced. But hearing you all now, knowing it's real, not hallucination, I don't know whether to be relieved or terrified. We need to understand what's happening, Robert Jameson said, his 1952 voice carrying authority and calm despite the circumstances. Let's compare notes. What was each of you doing when the convergence began at 1:47? We went around, each DJ describing their activities. The pattern became clear. We'd all been alone in the station, working the overnight shift, playing music, taking calls. But more specifically, we'd all been in the exact same spot, sitting in the broadcast chair, headphones on, looking out the window at falling snow. The convergence seemed to require specific conditions: Christmas Day, the graveyard shift, solitude, and our physical presence in that exact location. So what do we do? Andrea Mitchell asked from 2011. Do we just talk to each other until the convergence ends? How long will it last? I have an idea, Linda Morrison said from 1981. We're all radio hosts. We all have audiences listening right now in our respective years. What if we use this convergence to create something unique? A broadcast that spans decades, connecting listeners across time. You mean put this on air? Peter Walsh asked, from 1995. Deliberately broadcast the convergence? Why not? Linda replied. Think about what we could do. We could share music from different eras, let listeners hear songs that haven't been released yet in earlier years, or classics that newer listeners might not know. We could share stories about how the world changes, what stays the same, what we've learned across decades. We could create a collaborative show that's never existed before and will never exist again. The idea was insane, impossible, and absolutely perfect. We were radio DJs. Our job was to entertain, inform, and connect with listeners. What better way to honor that than to create a show that literally connected audiences across time? "I'm in," I said from 2018. "Let's create the most unique Christmas broadcast in history." One by one, the others agreed. Robert Jameson from 1952, the original voice of WKRM, would lead. He had the most experience and the longest perspective. Each of us would take turns introducing music from our respective eras, sharing stories from our time periods, and creating a conversation that flowed across 66 years. Robert began. "Good morning, listeners of WKRM past, present, and future. My name is Robert Jameson, and tonight, or this morning, depending on your perspective, you're about to hear something unprecedented. 7 DJs from 7 different decades are connected through an unexplainable phenomenon, and we're going to share this experience with you. What you're about to hear is impossible, but it's real. Music, stories, and voices from 1952, 1967, 1981, 1995, 2003, 2011, and 2018, all woven together into one continuous broadcast. He played White Christmas by Bing Crosby, the definitive version from his era, and his listeners in 1952 heard it as a contemporary hit. But we relayed the song forward, and listeners in 1967, 1981, 1995, 2003, 2011, and 2018 heard it too. A classic made fresh again through the temporal connection. Thomas Carter from 1967 followed, introducing All You Need Is Love by the Beatles, a song that was brand new to his listeners but would become iconic to future generations. He spoke about the cultural changes happening in his time, civil rights, protests, the space race, and his voice carried forward to listeners who would experience those events as history. Linda Morrison from 1981 played Do They Know It's Christmas by Band Aid, describing the charity efforts and social consciousness of her era. She talked about technology changes, the station's transition to digital equipment, the emergence of personal computers, the ways communication was evolving. Peter Walsh from 1995 introduced One Sweet Day by Mariah Carey and Boys That Second Men, speaking about the internet's early days, how information was becoming accessible in ways previous generations couldn't imagine, how the world was shrinking through digital connection. Sarah Chen from 2003 shared Where Is the Love by the Yeyis, Black Eyed Peas, discussing post-9/11 America. The ways tragedy had reshaped society, the resilience she saw in communities coming together despite fear and loss. Andrea Mitchell from 2011 played Someone Like You by Adele, talking about social media's impact, how platforms were changing human interaction for better and worse, creating unprecedented connection while somehow increasing loneliness. Then it was my turn. From 2018, I introduced Thank You Next by Ariana Grande, speaking about my era's challenges, political division, climate concerns, technological advancement racing ahead of ethical frameworks, but also about hope, resilience, and the enduring human capacity to adapt and persevere. We continued this pattern for hours, each DJ taking turns, creating a musical and narrative thread that wove through 66 years. But we did more than just play songs. We had conversations, asked each other questions, shared perspectives that only people from different eras could provide. Robert Jameson from 1952 asked those of us from later decades what had changed the most about the world. We told him about civil rights progress, technological revolution, space exploration, medical advances, the internet. He listened with wonder, sometimes disbelief, occasionally sadness when we described challenges his generation couldn't have imagined. Those of us from later years asked Robert about his world, post-war America, the simple technologies they relied on, the ways people connected without digital tools. His descriptions were fascinating, a window into a simpler but not necessarily easier time. Thomas Carter from 1967 wanted to know if the social movements of his era had succeeded. Linda Morrison from 1981 had complex answers, progress made, battles still fighting, victories and setbacks. The conversation was honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but always genuine. We also discovered troubling patterns. Sarah Chen from 2003 described another effect of the convergence that she'd experienced during her 2002 Christmas broadcast. For her listeners, the show had simply disappeared. From midnight until 6 a.m., the station had broadcast only static in the real world. She'd been talking, playing music, taking calls, but in her time period, no one had heard any of it. She'd been broadcasting into a void, her voice and songs traveling only to the temporal convergence, not to her actual listeners. "Check your call-in lines," she said quietly. "See if anyone's calling." I looked at my console. The phone lines that usually showed multiple callers, especially during my shift when insomniacs and night workers were my regular audience, were completely dead. No calls, no requests, no interaction. I was broadcasting to the temporal convergence, connecting with DJs from other decades, but in 2018 Des Moines, the real-world audience was hearing only static. The others confirmed the same phenomenon. For 6 hours on Christmas Day, once every decade or so, when the conditions aligned perfectly, WKRM's overnight broadcast disappeared from normal transmission and existed only in the temporal convergence, connecting hosts across time but isolating them from their contemporary listeners. Why? I asked. What's the purpose of this? Why connect us if it means losing our actual audiences? Robert Jameson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Maybe there's an audience we're not seeing. Maybe someone or something is listening to these convergent broadcasts, collecting them, preserving them. Or maybe the purpose isn't about audience at all. Maybe it's about us, the DJs, the voices in the night. Maybe we're meant to experience this, to understand that we're not alone, that others have walked this path before us and will walk it after us. The overnight shift is isolating. We sit alone in dark rooms talking to invisible people, never knowing if anyone really hears us. But tonight we know we're heard. We're connected across time, part of a lineage of voices that spans decades." His words resonated deeply. He was right. The loneliness of the graveyard shift was real. The uncertainty about whether anyone truly listened was constant. But in this impossible convergence, we had certainty. We heard each other, we connected, we mattered. At 5:47 a.m., exactly 4 hours after it had begun, the convergence started to fade. The voices of the other DJs became quieter, more distant, harder to hear clearly. Robert Jameson spoke first. "It's ending. I can feel the connection weakening. Before we lose each other, I want to say this. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this experience, for creating this impossible broadcast, for reminding me that the work we do matters, even when we can't see its impact." The others echoed his sentiment, each of us expressing gratitude, sharing final thoughts, saying goodbye to people we'd never met, but had connected with more deeply than most colleagues we saw daily. Sarah Chen from 2003 said, "David, this is why I resigned. After my convergence in 2002, I couldn't continue. Knowing this existed, knowing I'd experienced it but could never explain it, never repeat it, never prove it happened. It broke something in me. But hearing you all now, knowing it wasn't unique to me, that gives me closure. Thank you." Andrea Mitchell from 2011 said, "When I left for Chicago, I told myself it was for career advancement. But really, I was running from the memory of this. I heard voices one Christmas, couldn't explain it, convinced myself I'd imagined it. Now I know I didn't. I'm grateful to finally understand." At exactly 6 a.m., my regular sign-off time, the convergence ended completely. The voices disappeared, the static faded, and my console showed normal operations. I broadcast my standard closing. That's midnight with Brennan for Christmas Day 2018. Thank you for spending these hours with me. Until tomorrow night, this is David Brennan saying take care, drive safe, and remember, you're never truly alone in the darkness. I removed my headphones, saved the show to our backup system, though I suspected the recording would show only static, and sat in the silent booth as dawn light began filtering through the windows. The snow had stopped falling. Christmas morning had arrived. I opened Martha's gift, a coffee mug with "Best Voice in the Darkness" printed on it. I smiled, made myself coffee, and sat drinking it while watching Des Moines wake up for Christmas. Families would be gathering, presents would be opened, holiday meals would be prepared. Normal life continuing, no one aware that something impossible had occurred in this small radio station. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife. "Merry Christmas, looking forward to seeing you when you get home. The kids are already up. Love you." I responded, finished my coffee, and prepared to leave. But before I did, I went to the station's archives in the basement. The old broadcast logs, going back to the station's founding in 1952, were stored in filing cabinets that no one had accessed in years. I found the logs from Christmas Day 1952 and read Robert Jameson's entry for his overnight shift. It was brief. Christmas Day broadcast, light snow, no calls. Equipment showed unusual interference between 1:47 a.m. and 6:00 a.m. Unable to determine cause. Show completed on schedule. I found entries for 1967, 1981, 1995, 2003, and 2011. Each Christmas Day, each overnight shift, each log showed the same note. Unusual interference, no calls, normal completion. 7 timestamps across 66 years documenting a phenomenon that the DJs had experienced but couldn't explain or prove. I returned to the broadcast booth and wrote my own entry in the current log. Christmas Day broadcast 2018, light snow, no calls. Equipment showed unusual interference between 1:47 a.m. and 6:00 a.m. Unable to determine cause. Show completed on schedule. Future DJs would read that entry. Maybe they'd dismiss it as technical glitch, maybe they'd wonder. Or maybe if they were working the overnight shift on some future Christmas Day when conditions aligned perfectly, they'd experience the convergence themselves, hear voices from past decades, including mine, and understand that they were part of something larger than themselves. I drove home to my family, celebrated Christmas, and resumed my normal overnight shifts. But I was changed by the experience. The isolation of the graveyard shift felt different now. Not lonely, but connected. Part of a lineage of voices stretching back decades and forward into unknown futures. I understood that my broadcast mattered, even when call-in lines were silent, even when I couldn't measure my impact, even when I felt like I was talking into a void. 6 months later, I received an email from someone named Webb, a trucker who'd been driving through Iowa on Christmas Day 2018. He wrote, "I was listening to your show that night, somewhere between Des Moines and Omaha. Around 2 a.m., your station went to static for almost 4 hours. I kept the dial there anyway. Something about that static was comforting, like it was saying something I couldn't quite hear. Then at 6 a.m., you came back with your sign-off. I don't know what happened during those hours, but I wanted you to know that even when I couldn't hear your words, I felt less alone on that highway. Your station, your presence, mattered. Thank you." I printed his email and kept it in my wallet, alongside my broadcast logs and memories of that impossible Christmas Day when 7 DJs across 66 years created a show that existed outside normal time, connecting voices through decades, proving that the work we do in the darkness matters, even when we can't see or measure its impact. The convergence has never happened again during my shifts. Maybe it only occurs once for each DJ, a singular experience that changes how we understand our role and purpose. Or maybe the conditions simply haven't aligned again. The right combination of date, time, weather, and cosmic circumstance that opens temporary doors between years. But every Christmas day when I work my overnight shift, I pay attention between 1:47 a.m. and 6 a.m. I watch for unusual interference, listen for distant voices, hope for connection with past and future colleagues. And even though the convergence hasn't returned, I broadcast as if it might, creating shows that honor that impossible experience, that maintain the spirit of connection across time. Sarah Chen was right. The convergence breaks something, makes it hard to continue in the same simple way. But it also builds something. An understanding that our voices matter beyond the moment, that connection transcends time, that the isolation of the graveyard shift is an illusion. We're never truly alone in the darkness. We're part of a lineage, a community of voices spanning decades, all doing the same essential work, keeping company with those who can't sleep, providing comfort to the lonely, maintaining presence through the longest hours of night. I still work at WKRM, still broadcast from the same booth where Robert Jameson sat in 1952, where Thomas Carter, Linda Morrison, Peter Walsh, Sarah Chen, and Andrea Mitchell all worked their shifts across the decades. I'm part of that lineage now, my voice added to the sequence, my experience woven into the station's hidden history. And someday, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20, when conditions align perfectly on a Christmas Day overnight shift, a future DJ will sit where I sit, hear voices from past decades, including mine, and join the convergence. They'll experience what I experienced, connect across time, create an impossible broadcast, and understand that they're part of something larger and more mysterious than they could have imagined. The shows continue. The voices persist. And in the darkness between midnight and dawn on Christmas Day, when the world sleeps and barriers between times grow thin, radio stations become more than broadcast facilities. They become temporal crossroads, connecting past, present, and future in ways that can't be explained but can be experienced, remembered, and honored. My name is David Brennan. I'm a late-night radio DJ at WKRM in Des Moines, Iowa. And on Christmas Day 2018, I participated in the most impossible broadcast of my career, a show that connected 7 DJs across 66 years, proving that some stories, some connections, some moments transcend the normal rules of time and space. It happened. I was there. And though I can't prove it, though the recordings show only static, I know with absolute certainty that it was real. The broadcast continues, echoing through time, waiting for the next convergence, the next Christmas Day when conditions align and voices from across decades connect once more in the darkness before dawn.